Jude and Zach, those were phenomenal Divrei Torah. I'm so proud of you both. They were thoughtful. They're important topics, both of them. They're incisive, and they were complementary. Zach, you got us to think about the Shemitah and Yovel, sabbatical and Jubilee, in nuanced and compelling ways. And Jude, you got us to think about the relative monetary equivalent of human beings as it related to the ancient sanctuary, and as it relates to gender binaries, and as it relates to us now. And you both got us to think about what we do with the Torah today. How do we relate to our original sacred text when it no longer feels directly relevant? How do we live by it? Do we live by it? Do we ignore it? Do we edit it? Do we reinterpret it? Do we adapt it? One of the first things you both did was to take the mitzvot you were focused on that seemed irrelevant to us and show us how and why they actually are conceptually highly relevant to us. And Zach, you showed us that the laws about farming, which might seem utterly meaningless to urban people, are actually about ecosystem regeneration, which is something we know we're failing at and matters a lot. You showed us how laws about debt release that were so idealistic and impractical that they were already nullified by our greatest sage 2,000 years ago are actually highly compelling to us, as the concept of both Shemitah and Jubilee was that we would take care of each other financially and make sure that people who fell on hard times would have what they need and the ability to start over. And you pointed out, rightly, that we fail at this too, abysmally, getting us to really visualize and take in the staggering numbers and percentages of people who have no homes, living in abject poverty in the United States. And the truth is that most of us live on a day-to-day basis as if this is not our problem, as if it's not our responsibility. You made the case successfully that these mitzvot have become obsolete, at least for American Jews, in that we do not live by them, but that in concept they remain highly relevant, meaningful, even compelling. And I need to pause here to acknowledge that you gave us the image of 500 people on the streets for every football stadium worth of people. You did that just 2 weeks after a homeless man named Jordan Neely was murdered on the New York City subway on the F train, in the midst of a car full of commuters. He was shouting that he was hungry and thirsty when a man named Daniel Penny grabbed him and choked him until he killed him. And Penny was then released by police after killing a man in full public view. And many observers have raised the obvious point that if Penny were black, there is zero chance that he would have been released on that day that he publicly killed a man. And if the man he killed were not black and were not homeless, it is equally unlikely that he would have been released. This terrible incident actually connects to your Devar Torah, Jude, because it has to do with how we value human beings. Like the mitzvah you focused on from the time of the Torah, in our society we do not assign all people the same value. The only way that we tolerate the systemic homelessness that you describe, Zach, is by dehumanizing homeless people and seeing them as less valuable than other people. We know this is also true about race, as this example shows, that white people are valued more than people of color. And we also know that it's true about gender. We can easily see that in the laws being passed around our country banning abortion at the point when an embryo is a clump of cells the size of a pencil point, or even banning the morning after pill, and even in the case of rape and incest. There is no chance that those laws would be introduced, never mind passed, if men could get pregnant. Zero chance. And your critique, Jude, of the valuation of people of the sanctuary, at the sanctuary, was not only that women were valued at 3/5 of a man, which is an eerily familiar ratio, but also that the Torah imagined that there were only two genders, something we know now is not true and not right. And you raised the question, well, so what do we do? What do we do when the Torah is out of sync with our world, out of sync with what we've come to know and understand about who we are and how to live, and when it's not reflected in our Torah? When the mitzvot have not only fallen out of practice or become impracticable, but when we do not believe that they are the right way to live. So first of all, I love that you answered that question by looking at Torah Queries, which is one of my very favorite Jewish books. And you suggested that we could say that the Torah is not relevant and just not even try to live by it, which is probably what a lot of people in this sanctuary do. Or we could edit it. We could change it to fit what seems right to us. We could make the language gender neutral, which is a specific form of editing. And I want to take a moment on this question of editing the text, or changing or adapting the Torah. Because a lot of times people think, you can't do that. That's radical. It's the Torah. It's a holy text. Our people have been living by the Torah for thousands of years. Who are you to come along and think you know better? But with just the most cursory investigation, we know that our people have not been living by the Torah for thousands of years. Our people have been adapting the Torah for thousands of years. Zach, you gave us a famous example, two famous examples, the Prose Ball and Heta Mechira. Hillel adapted the Torah. Hillel, our greatest sage. Rabbis throughout our history have adapted the Torah to make it relevant to their world and make it possible for Torah to be lived by the people of their time. Last week, I talked about the mitzvah of Nida and how the Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox Jewish community have adapted that mitzvah to make it so that women are, in many cases, untouchables. And how liberal and progressive Jews have adapted that mitzvah to create a whole new renewal of the mikveh as a place for new beginnings for people of all genders. So the question isn't whether we can adapt the Torah. The question is, why aren't we doing it more? Because it's not like, as American Jews, we have an alternative system in US law that answers our moral questions and offers us a comprehensive guide about how to live. We do not have such a guide. Just today, we talked about how we don't have an adequate set of laws or customs that allow the earth and ecosystems to regenerate. We don't have laws or customs that effectively provide for people's basic needs. We don't adequately ensure that everyone has housing, food, or other essentials. We have not improved upon the valuation of people as described in the Torah, and we're still valuing people unequally, even though our values about this have dramatically changed. We look at Orthodox Judaism and say, well, that's not how we want to live. That doesn't represent our values. But we're not providing an alternative. And there are many, many other aspects of our society and our lives that would benefit from an up-to-date, practical, livable guide, which is what Torah is meant to be for us. The word Torah means instruction or guidance. I actually wrote my rabbinic thesis about this very problem and proposed that we create a liberal halakha, a progressive system of Jewish law and practice, a whole system of how to live based on adapting Torah to our times, which would include adding mitzvot that are important to us but aren't there, cutting mitzvot that are morally repugnant to us, expanding categories of mitzvot, adapting, editing, adjusting, reinterpreting the Torah to be the guide we need. I was influenced greatly by my rabbinical school advisor, Rabbi Dr. Rachel Adler, who wrote a brilliant book called Engendering Judaism, a book that aimed at exactly your questions, Jude. She advocated in this book that we would reimagine halakha as, quote, a dynamic rather than static, visionary rather than conservative, open to the outside rather than closed, arising communally, cooperatively, covenantly, rather than being externally imposed and passively obeyed system. We can imagine halakha as a world that we get to create, in which we agree to a way of life that represents our values. Or we could imagine it as a tree that has its roots in tradition but always grows new branches that reach in new directions. Or we can imagine it as a bridge that stretches from the reality of the world we're in to a future that is the world that should be. And the way we get there is through our actions, our mitzvot, that we choose and define to be representative of our values. And we can imagine halakha as a conversation that includes everyone. Rabbi Adler says we could open up a halachic discourse and shape it to address the needs, desires, and obligations of diverse, gendered people inhabiting specific times and places. And then, if we did that, then when we study the Torah, it would never be irrelevant. It would never be a relic rolled up in a scroll that doesn't have to do with us. It would always be the jumping off point to a conversation that we're a part of. A conversation that isn't just theoretical, but that binds us because we're crafting and shaping together the actual way we're choosing to live our lives, inspired by the tradition we come from and based on the world we're trying to get to. So why don't we do this? It takes courage. It takes courage to openly suggest new mitzvot or formally adapt old ones. Also, it takes strong communal bonds by which people decide to throw in together on how they're going to live. And most of all, it is not easy. It is much easier to either impose rules from above and require people to follow them, or in a society based on individualism and autonomy, to not take collective responsibility for the ways our actions shape our world. But what I'm proposing and what Dr. Adler is proposing is not easy, but I wonder if we're coming to a time when the utter failure of the larger society to meet our moral needs becomes so significant and so harmful that people become eager to opt in together, to start to articulate what life should be like, what mitzvot we can commit to together, what ways we do want to take responsibility for a new way of life, for the future of our world. I, for one, will be ready for that day. And maybe you will too. Shabbat shalom.